everyone. Thank you for joining Man Under Construction once again. We are going to dive deep in today's episode. I'm excited about this upcoming project that we're working on. I'm working on with Quentin Hafner, author of Black Belt Husband. And what we're going to do, what we're setting out to do, is to break down each chapter per episode. And we want to dive deep into the different aspects of that Quentin broke down on achieving Black Belt husbandhood. And we hope that it gives you insights and just deeper knowledge and tools that you can use to be able to be that better husband, be that better man in general. And Quentin Hafner, thank you for wanting to be a part of this project, and thank you for joining us today on the Men Under Construction podcast.
Thanks, Mike. I'm looking forward to our conversation and seeing where it goes.
Awesome. So Black Belt Husband, we've talked before. I've had you on the podcast, and well, now we're gonna do this on video. But we spoke before. What inspired you to do write the book? And I know that you work with men and also with families. You're a licensed marriage and family therapist. So your input and what you have to say is so valuable. And I know guys out there are going to be able to take something with them. So today we're going to dive into chapter 1, which is going to be about self-awareness and about knowing yourself and how that is the foundation of achieving, to take that step to be a noble man, to be that black belt husband. And Quentin Hafner is here, and he's going to talk to us about that. And as with everything, there are technical difficulties, and I pressed the wrong button. So before we started the conversation, before we started recording, I know Quentin had something he wanted to share about this book, some feelings that he had towards this book. So why don't you go ahead and share that with us?
Just jump right into that, right?
Just go right into it.
Well, I was going to start saying, we were talking about the book, and I was just saying that, I have a lot of mixed feelings about the book, and I'll tell you a little bit about kind of what the mixed feelings are. So, I'm really glad that I wrote the book, and more than anything else, writing the book for me was, it was really just like a personal journey where I was able to really organize my thoughts about being married and being what I believe is to be a successful partner and a successful man. And writing the book was really clarifying for me in just organizing my thoughts and how I came to understand all this stuff about being a husband and being, having a successful relationship, and one of the mixed feelings part that I was going to describe to you was, one of the most, I think, difficult things about a lot of the clients that kind of, come into my life is that they really never take this stuff serious until it's too late.
Yeah.
And I've thought long and hard about kind of why that is and what that's about. And, what is it about the nature of guys that have such a hard time asking for help and reaching out to get assistance in the realm of their personal life like this, before it hits a threshold where it's not recoverable. And so the mixed feelings comes from a place of like writing this book to be helpful to men, but also understanding that the majority of men could really give two shits about reading it until it's too late.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting book in that way that I you write a book that says, hey, here's some ideas on what it means to be successful. But I know, because this is the world that I live in, I know that 95% of guys are not going to be interested in picking up this book.
Right.
in the time that it might be really impactful and important for them. Now, and that's not to say that at some point, after their lives fall apart, that reading the book couldn't be, massively valuable, or in helping in their transformation. But I would love to see it happen in a
Yeah.
time that I was able to see the results, or I was able to see them kind of make some corrective action before it became something too late. Does that make sense, the way I'm kind of describing that?
100%, 100%. And I can, before you go on, let me just share something. I can
Mm-hmm.
100% relate to that because
Mm-hmm.
that happened to me. I am not here because all of a sudden I woke up and oh, hey, I want to be a better man. It's because, and more, it happens more often than not. It's until the guy is at the bottom with
Mm-hmm.
nothing, realize
Mm-hmm.
that his own actions got him to the place that he is right now, that he starts
Mm-hmm.
to realize he needs to pick himself up. And
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, the that's the typical cycle of men finally trying to get themselves together.
And that was, by the way, that was my personal journey too in my
Mhm.
first marriage. That everything fell apart, and I kind of had to come to my own kind of come to Jesus meeting with myself, that I was just, I didn't know what I was doing, and that I was really unsuccessful. But it's probably not like other jobs, or situations out there in the world where if you're a personal trainer, you realize that someone's life could be so much more fulfilling if they were physically healthier and they were eating well and working out, and then you just watch them and you see how overweight they are and unhealthy, and
Yeah.
it's like maybe it's like the codependent part in us, where we're like, no, I want it to be different for you, I want it to be better, but realizing that it can't. So but if I feel pretty strongly, that's why I like talking to you, Mike, because I think that your audience are listeners that care. And I think they are a wise audience. And I think it's an audience where they recognize the ancient wisdom in the reality that we can make changes before our lives fall apart. Because the truth is, when my life fell apart and I was too stubborn to kind of look at myself and make changes, it was because I was immature. I was a fool. I mean, in that sense, I was very foolish. I was very immature. And it takes a certain amount of maturity to recognize, okay, no, I don't have to hit rock bottom. I don't have to hit rock bottom in order to get to be more successful in life, or to live a more fulfilling life. So I think your audience is kind of, up to speed with that idea. And if they're listening to this recording that we're doing, then certainly they are interested in trying to make some kind of changes in their life for the better.
Yeah. And I agree with everything you're saying, and I can totally relate to it. And that's why uh, the way I present my content, it let me preface it before with this. A lot of the content out there, and I feel that much of the stuff in the man's sphere, the area that men
Mm-hmm.
work in, is
Mm-hmm.
really, I don't know how to say it, very bright, very jolly. It's usually by older men uh, who are very clean, wear plaid shirts with khakis, and and a lot of guys, when they see that, there's like, oh, that's just like my old grandpa or whatever, and it doesn't click with them. And I purposely, the way I presented my content, a lot of guys, when they see this stuff, they're in a dark place,
Mm-hmm.
and putting unicorns and rainbows is not going to relate to them. So that's
Yeah.
why I go with the dark images, and that's why I go with the dark themes, and I talk about the dark places in a man's life,
Mm-hmm.
like pornography and the damage that just the chaos that causes within their mind and heart, and the way they perceive relationships. Um, and I think that's and I've been told this and I believe it, and I think that's why a lot of men gravitate to it, because I the way I present it is I get down in the weeds until I'm like, you know what, I've been in porn or I've been in this, and it's ugly, it is bloody. You're just you're destroying yourself, and ultimately you're going to destroy other people. And that's one of the reasons why I believe a lot of the men stuff out there, uh, like it doesn't gravitate to a lot of these men that are left out in limbo, trying to figure life out, because they're seeing life in this perspective, and a lot of the content is already you're already like you've already overcome, you're up here, and they can't
Yeah.
seem to relate to the stuff up here. So that's why I try to compensate with that, with the way I present my content, if that makes any sense.
No, it's great. I think you're doing a great job. I think that's wonderful. And I can see what you're saying when I look at your content. And the other thing too that I noticed, like in maybe I'll just we don't have to stay on this topic, but I'm just going to piggyback off of what you're saying, that a lot of the masculinity stuff on the internet that I see is um, it's interesting because I think it's it's appealing to a certain part of guys, um, and it's also, in my estimation, what keeps a lot of guys really stuck. And so
I know what you're
what
talking
I
about.
okay, so it's like, they're like I'll use simple concepts like, alpha male and beta male. So it's kind of like, if you see a lot of the masculinity stuff on the internet, it's like, yeah, alpha male, alpha male, alpha male, like, be the man, be a badass, and I think that's great. I love being a badass, and I love being I love being an alpha male with my wife. But it's so much more sophisticated than that, and it's so
Yeah.
much more complex than that, because there's an appropriateness to, at times, understanding when it's healthy to be more beta, and knowing actually how to vacillate between those polarizing states of mind, going
Mhm.
back and forth between being more, sensitive and emotionally intelligent. When do we stay in that place, and then when do we withdraw from that place and become more aggressive and more, you know assertive, right? And so what I see out there is like, it's kind of like a one trick pony. It's like,
Mhm.
be this way. And um and i and I think that it's just there. I think there's a more sophisticated message that guys need to start grabbing onto, in order for them to have really fulfilling lives. Because trust me, I work with a ton of strong alpha males whose wives have walked right out the door.
Yeah.
And so we have to understand, it's like, well, why is that happening? Why does that happen? And and really, and for guys to really take some sense of ownership and responsibility of that, and say, okay, well, what part of that is me? Am I too alpha? Am I too stubborn? Is there too much ego? And that's why I love and I love jujitsu. And I'm not plugging the book at all, but I really loved how jujitsu fits so good into that marriage paradigm, because the truth is, in jujitsu, if you try to walk around being the alpha, you're going to get put to sleep.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting that marriage is the same way too. And by the way, if you walk around in jujitsu being the beta, you're going to get put to sleep. That jujitsu is this such an interesting metaphor for relationships, that we have to have the sophistication and the complexity to go back and forth. There's times to be the alpha, and there's times to be the beta, if we want to use those simple terms.
Yeah.
And that's why I really loved how there was just such a blending of jujitsu and marriage. And if anybody's listening that does Brazilian jiu-jitsu, they'll fully understand that idea, that sometimes you're the hammer. In jiu-jitsu, we say sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail, and you just don't know which day you're going to be which.
Yeah.
But understanding kind of going back and forth between those two places is really important.
And you touched on something that could possibly lead to what we're actually going to discuss about your book, which is chapter 1, which I'll say is about knowing yourself, which is about self-awareness. A lot of the content out there, and feel free to chime in on here if you have something to say. Um, a lot of this stuff, like you were taking, is just that you were talking about, is just straight on alpha male. Everything on. You're always on. You're taking charge. You're commanding the room. You're doing this. You're doing that. You're always just on. A lot of these guys walk around with lack of self-awareness because a lot of these sentiments are overcompensations of wounds that they were dealt earlier in life.
Mm-hmm.
So without realizing, these guys lack a fundamental perspective of self-awareness because they're just overcompensated. They're covering up and overachieving in other areas just to put that other part under the rug, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. It makes so much sense. And I think that, I think as a society and as a culture, I think we have to kind of look at that in some ways and say, well, why is Instagram filled with all this alpha male stuff? Let's say, if you follow a lot of masculinity stuff on Instagram, why is that? Why? And I think, and I touch on this in the book a little bit, I think a lot of it is because, from a cultural standpoint, there's been a big pendulum shift, a pendulum shift or a pendulum swing from that traditional kind of patriarchal role from like the 1950s, where men were really in charge of their families, let's say, and it's shifted quite a bit where I think a lot of people my age, I'm 44, so a lot of people my age grew up with fathers who were very docile and very passive. And they lost, like in a certain way, I think they lost respect for their father because they didn't see their father have enough backbone in the relationship. And as kind of a response to that, it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to do what my dad did. I'm gonna, it's kind of like a lot of the red pill stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna have a different relationship. And then they come to realize that it's just filled with a whole bunch of other different problems. So, I think there's a reason all that alpha male stuff is kind of going on. But you and I in this conversation, we're talking about relationships. And I guess the takeaway from what we're saying right now is that we have to be more sophisticated than just kind of the one trick ponies of alpha male, or because there's a whole other camp out there, which is almost disturbing in a different way, that they're promoting kind of the beta mentality, and we can't be either or. We have to find the sophistication and to know how to vacillate between those two roles, because if we get stuck in either of those roles, we're going to lose.
And that's why I find the book by, I think it's Robert Moore, about the 4 archetypes: king, magician, lover, and
that's a great
warrior.
book, by the way.
Yeah. And I gravitate to that. And I think, and I hate to even use beta or alpha and beta. I've actually backed away from even using those. At first I would, when I first started the page, but now I've kind of, like I told you, my page is matured. I have matured and I see things a little differently. And instead of viewing them as it's just those two dimensions, we have different hats that we need to wear. There are times where we need to be a king, and there are times where we need to be a warrior. There are times when we need to be a magician. And I left out the other archetype. I'm sorry?
Lover.
Yes, exactly. And they all fit in different perspectives. Like you go to work and you get it, right? You're a warrior, you're getting things done, you're strategic, you're a king, you're leading, but you come home and you can't have that mentality. You can't have that warrior mentality when you come home to your wife. Like you gotta, take the armor off, put the sword down, and and show her the heart underneath all that armor. So it's not even about being weak. It's just all you're doing is switching. It's kind of like lateral moves. You're switching
Mm-hmm.
between what you have to do at that particular time. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why I love the four archetypes and the idea of it, because yeah, it just encapsulates the different aspects and how complex a man is. Like a lot of times out there, like we were talking about the pages out there, it's just one dimension of a guy, and there's just
Mm-hmm.
it's so sophisticated, like you said, so
Mm-hmm.
complex, and there's
Mm-hmm.
so many things that hinge on it. Uh, like you were talking the fathers being passive and just laid back, and then as a result the mother had to pick up the slack and be more domineering because the father was
Mm-hmm.
the opposite, the polar opposite. So now the child grows up and he sees the mother, well, I'm not going to let women try to domineer over me, and you, like you said, he overcompensates and tries to be over aggressive, and then we get all those pages out there that just targeted towards aggressiveness and all this alpha stuff. And so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it comes full circle. It's all connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man, that's great. That's great. So what should we say about self-awareness? Where do you want to kind of go with this conversation?
Well,
There's so many places to go here.
I know there is, and what's crazy, like I mentioned before, like a lot of the stuff we see out there is just guys who lack the self-awareness that they're reacting from something that happened back then. Like
Mm-hmm.
we perceive the world through our experiences, and if you're hurt, wounded, or you're coming from a bad place, without that self-awareness, you're not going to realize that you're acting this way, and you see that, and you look at yourself and see the weaknesses and the strengths. So that's one thing I want to focus on, and like you said in your chapter and the way you break down Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, this is the foundation of where your journey begins.
Yeah, I think it makes me think about like when it's like, well, how do you know what does the journey of getting married look like for most people? And it looks something like this. I'm single, I'm dating, I meet a pretty girl, she makes me laugh, it feels really good, we fall in love, and marriage is the natural progression of that cycle.
Right.
And then and then in some ways it kind of stops there for a lot of people, in the sense that what like there's a book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's like a business kind of management leadership book, and I love the title because it's super applicable to marriage too, because the process of dating, falling in love, meeting a pretty girl, gets you to a certain point in the relationship journey, but it won't be enough to be sustaining in a long-term committed relationship.
Mhm.
And there's tons of research to kind of prove that. I mean, we could look at, you could look at divorce rates, or we could look at marital satisfaction rates, and somewhere between, they call the honeymoon period in marriage ends, somewhere between 18 months and 36 months. So in the first 30 in the first 18 to 36 months, we're kind of blissfully in love. Everything seems to be working great. And somewhere around the 18-month mark, the relationship kind of falls off the cliff.
Mhm.
And and that's kind of like the first kind of crisis point in relationships, where people have an opportunity to do some self-awareness examining, like, well, okay, um, what is it about me that makes it hard to be married to? What is it about my temperament and my personality and my quirks that make me a difficult partner? Where did I even learn to be married? Where did I even learn to interact with somebody in a certain way? Why do I talk to my wife that way? Where did I learn that? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? There's so many questions that we can ask to try to make sense of why the relationship may not be working as well as we want. But unfortunately, for most people, that's not what they do. What they do is, instead of looking inward, instead of becoming self-aware, we externalize the problem and we focus on our mates. We say, well, why is she that way? And what the hell's wrong with her? And why does she talk to me that way? And where did she get that? Well, that must be, she's got daddy issues. And, I can't believe that she does that. And she doesn't have sex with me enough. And how dare her? And why does she spend all that money? So instead of looking inward, we tend to look outward.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And, and so that kind of fork in the road is part one of the journey. It's really kind of firing ourselves from looking outward. It's firing ourselves from even giving two shits about what our wife does and why she does it. And taking kind of an extreme ownership mindset to ourselves and really asking ourselves some really hard questions. And, and I got to use the Brazilian jiu-jitsu metaphor again.
No, go ahead. I know you're hesitant.
You're going to hate me by the end of this, because I'm going to sound like that obnoxious jiu-jitsu geek that's trying to tell everybody they need to do it.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. It's part of your book.
And I want to preface that, everything that we're talking about in these conversations is like, it's how to be the best. Okay. We're not talking about how to be average. We're talking about how to be in that, 5% group of people that are really doing it right. Statistics say, roughly, okay, we'll just look at some data real quick. So, roughly half of all marriages are going to end. Okay. So 50% of the group, boom, it's out the door. It doesn't work. Okay. Yeah. So then we look at what's left of the 50% that stay married. Well, roughly about 30% of the couples that end up staying married are massively unhappy. Okay. So 50% don't work, 30% are unhappy. So that leaves us with 20% roughly of all marriages are marriages that you, I, or anybody listening to this thing would even want. Mm-hmm. So everything that we're talking about how to get to the cream of the crop, right? So when I talk about self-awareness and looking inward, I'm like, this is a hard challenge. I mean, I'll be the first to admit it. I don't like doing it. You don't like doing it. But if we want to be that black belt husband, this is not white belt husband, right? If we want to be black belt husband, we got to be able to do this stuff. And I'll be the first to admit it. It is hard freaking work. When my wife pisses me off, the first thing I think about is what's wrong with her, right?
It's just natural. That's almost instinct.
It's instinct. It's absolute instinct. And I have to really work hard and challenge myself and say, okay, you know what? I'm not going to worry about her. I'm just going to worry about myself. And I'm going to ask myself some really hard questions. Why does it even bother me? What she just did right now, why does that even bother me in the first place? What's my problem that bothers me? Yeah. So what goes on for me? Why do I react this way? Why do I think this way? Why do I feel this way? Why do I talk to her this way? Why do I look at her this way? I just keep looking at myself. And the cool thing about that, one of the most beautiful things about taking that extreme ownership of self-awareness is that we come to realize at some point that that's the only thing that we can control anyway. I can only control myself, and I can only fix myself. I can't fix my wife. Yeah. I could point out all her flaws, and I could, criticize her and condemn her and say, oh, you have daddy issues and this is why you do this and you got problems. But in the process of doing that, she's not going to change. She's not going to be different. She's only going to be different when she chooses that she wants to be different. And so the beautiful thing about this self-awareness thing and this extreme ownership of really owning your self-awareness is that we realize that we are truly empowered to make changes, and we have control over the things that we have influence of. And everything else, it's totally outside of our control.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of guys get stuck on that. They want to control everything. They want to control their wife. They can barely control themselves. And I'm not sure exactly what I mean. It usually originates from somewhere, and that's where that self-awareness comes in. And you're right. You're 100% right that self-reflection and asking yourself the tons of questions that you just asked. Why am I here? Why am I doing this way? Why do I need control of everything? Asking those kind of questions are hard. And it's amazing that we 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 can easily point out the faults in everyone else but ourselves. And that's truly where it all begins. It begins with us. I believe it, with this journey that I've been on myself and having read the book, Black Belt Husband, um, everything originates from you. Once you start changing yourself, or once you start looking inward, your perspective starts to change. Thus, your world starts to change. But it has to start. It has to begin with that baseline level of self-awareness. And without it, we're just going to be in circles. We're going to keep going in circles. We're going to repeat the same things, and we're going to keep getting into the same fights. For those fellas that are married, and if you're not married, understanding that baseline level of self-awareness, um, you're going to jump into something and repeat the same history of your parents or your friends uh, without even knowing it.
Absolutely. You're going to repeat that generational cycle. And, and that's kind of a sad thing too, because there's so much research to kind of show us that unless we really are diligent about making some very deliberate and conscious changes, we will end up in the same relationships that our parents had and our grandparents had. And, some of that worked and some of it didn't, and, the self-awareness thing too, it's kind of like, I realized that, um, it kind of goes back to the whole alpha male thing that we were talking about earlier. And what we see on the internet is
Yeah.
that, um, all relationship problems can be boiled down to one simple thing. It's fear. And when men or women, this is a human thing, but we'll just keep it in the context of men because we're talking about guys. When guys get afraid, we do two things. We gravitate towards control as a way to mitigate the fear,
Mm-hmm.
or we become very docile and passive as a way to mitigate the fear. So all that alpha male stuff on the internet, it's a lot of it is fear-based stuff. It's a lot of fear-based kind of ideologies that say, if I don't stay in control, then something bad is going to happen to me because the world doesn't feel safe if I don't feel like I'm in control.
Well, and man, that is actually, you hit on something pretty profound. So what necessarily do they fear? And you were talking about how they fear just not being in
The,
control, but in the
mhm,
context that way we can kind of talk about this in the context of what the men of guys majority of the
mhm,
content that I see out there is
mhm.
woman. It's I find it ironic for as much as they put down women, they talk about them so much. I find that kind
Mm-hmm.
of ironic. You know what I'm saying? They're like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you don't need women, but they also talk about game and how you can have
Right.
women chase you. It's like, well,
Right.
I thought women were, the thorn in your side. Why are you talking about them so much? So it's kind of a weird irony that they do that. But since we're there, let's kind of dive into what are they necessarily afraid of? Being dumped,
Well,
rejection.
well, yeah. The fear can be kind of broken down into kind of two roads. Okay, and all of us humans kind of fall on. And there's layers of sophistication, but just to kind of keep it a little bit simple in this conversation,
Hmm.
the fear is, it's a fear of, one fear is the fear of being rejected or abandoned. So we call it's an abandonment fear or abandonment anxiety. And So out of that place, I'm going to act and do and say and be a lot of different ways as a way to make sure you don't leave me, as a way to make sure that you don't reject me, as a way to make sure that I don't get abandoned. And then, so that's one. Okay. And then the other fear that's very predominant or very common, so this is kind of the fork in the road, is a fear of suffocation. I'm afraid that I'm going to get kind of swallowed up by you. I'm afraid that I'm going to get dominated by you. I'm afraid that I'm going to become really small and I'm going to have to fit into your world. So it's kind of a suffocation anxiety. So those are the two big fears. And then there's little sub fears kind of underneath all that. But it's really just those two fears. And the truth is, every single one of us enters relationships with those fears.
Yeah.
But 97 guys out of 100, if I asked them walking on the street, what are you afraid of in your relationship? They wouldn't be able to articulate that. They would not have that level of insight to be able to articulate that. They would be like, they would look at me kind of cross-eyed and they would say like, what are you talking about? My wife's just a bitch. That's what they would say. Yeah. Right?
They would speak to you in caveman terms.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have anything I'm afraid of. My wife is just fucking needy. How can I get her to stop being so needy? So when you hear that my wife is needy, that's the suffocation fear, right? She's going to swallow me up. She needs too much of me. I'm going to lose my freedom. I'm going to lose my sense of self. Yeah. It's all that same stuff. So kind of going back to what we were saying earlier. So all these problems are because of fear, and the fear can be broken down to those two basic camps. And, and again, there's, I write about it a lot in the jiu-jitsu world there too, because those same fears, we go into jiu-jitsu with those fears too. I'm afraid that someone's going to really hurt me. So in order to protect myself, I'm going to have to get really aggressive and try to hurt them, or I'm going to have to get really small and docile and not be a threat so they don't hurt me too much.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And we just do that in relationships too. We do the same thing in relationships. So becoming self-aware about like, well, what are these fears that we carry and where do these fears come from? Like we didn't come out of the womb as infants with these fears. These fears are beliefs and mindsets and part of our experience of our lives, of past relationships, and it starts with our first relationship with our caregivers, and then we have girlfriends and we have exes along the way, and they shape these experiences us. And so we get to a place in we get to a place in marriage, and the marriage isn't working well, and we don't think about it this way. We don't think about it this way, but it's so critical to think about it this way. And that's why I put it as chapter 1. It's like, it is the most foundational thing to consider, because everything that we do after that is going to be some kind of a derivative of our self-awareness. Like we can use that fear thing as an example. So if I'm afraid of being abandoned by my wife, all the things that I do in the relationship are going to come from that place.
Yeah, 100%. Like we were talking about earlier, I mentioned our actions we decide how we're going to react to certain situations based on how we perceive them, how we receive them in our life. The way our father treated our mother treated our father, the way both parents treated us, the way all those little things that happen throughout our life, our experiences, we are going to make or decide to react a certain way based on that experience, based on how we perceived all those things in the current situation that we find ourselves in. And go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely right. I was just going to say, unless we've done this kind of self-awareness work.
Exactly. That's where it leads to it right here. That road leads to right here. And that's why I agree with you 100% that self-awareness is the foundation, because you acknowledge that you're reacting a certain way because of a certain thing, something happened to you, and your reaction possibly might not be the best one. And when you can acknowledge your weaknesses and your strengths, that's when we can start like, okay, I got to build on my strengths and I got to level up my weaknesses. And then you can go from there. That's why I agree with you 100% that this self-awareness needs to be the foundation of any journey, whether in pursuing noble manhood or in trying to be that black belt husband. So yeah, 100%.
And just to kind of add on that too, I just and you might have experienced this too in your work that what so another thing I was going to say, and I was saying that I think you can relate to this in your work too. You probably see this in your work, is that when it comes to self-awareness, one of the things that's difficult to do is it's the difference between like doing and taking action and just being and being contemplative. So it's kind of like the difference between being like a human being and a human doing. You probably heard that cliche before. So
Oh, okay.
most guys, they don't like to sit with themselves. They don't like to contemplate.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, hey, give me the punch list, and I just want to hit items 1 through 5, and I want to be done. But unfortunately, self-awareness doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
Self-awareness require. I mean, I'll never forget this. This is like such a pivotal moment in my life. It was the very first time I went to therapy, and my therapist. It was probably like maybe the first or second time I had met him, and he said, okay, this is what I want you to do. He said, until I see you again next week, he said, every day I want you just to spend 15 minutes sitting with yourself. And I was like, what do I do in the 15 minutes? Do I read? Do I journal? He's like, nope. He's like, the only rule is that you can't do anything. You can't read. You can't journal. You just got to sit there and sit with yourself. And I was like, that sounds like the stupidest thing anybody would ever do.
That's lame. What in the
I'm like,
world?
what in the world, right?
Well, I'd rather blow something up for 15 minutes.
Exactly. So I do. So I trust him enough to kind of do this exercise, and I'll never forget. It was horrible. It felt so uncomfortable to just sit with myself, and it was a really like profound moment for me, because I realized, like, when I started to kind of just be with myself without any distraction.
Yeah.
Oh, I had to feel a lot of stuff, and feelings were coming up for me that I worked so hard to bury and suppress and all that stuff. So that kind of like,
let me jump in here.
go ahead.
You're touching on something very, very profound. I just wanted to add that because I want to come back to that, because that is.
Yeah. Well, no, just go ahead. What were you going to say? We'll just go back and forth. What comes to your mind when you hear me say that?
That is profound. We are so used to being busy that we've lost the ability to hear ourselves. We drown ourselves with activity. It's kind of like when you're on adrenaline. Like I haven't done it in a while, but I've gone biking, on off-road biking, kind of like on a trail, and you're hyped up, you're on, you got adrenaline going, you're doing these little turns, and or even when you're just running, or when you're when you're hyperactive, even just playing ball, a lot of the times we hit ourselves, or we get bruised, or I'm on the bike and I scratch myself. We don't feel it because we're in the moment. We're going. But once all the adrenaline settles, we start to feel the pain. And the thing is that we're so used to being we're just busy, constantly going, always on that adrenaline high, seeking for the next moment, going, that we don't once we settle down and the adrenaline starts wearing off, we start to feel the pain, and we start to feel the bruises that we got during our induced adrenaline high. And that's exactly what I thought about that. That when you slow down, you start to feel all the things. Like you start to like, oh man, what's going on? You start to reflect on some of the. You start to think about some of the self-awareness stuff we're talking about now.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I love the mountain biking analogy. Like you're going to get scratched, but you don't really notice it until you stop. And you're like, oh, shoot, my arm hurts.
Yeah, exactly. So that,
And,
yeah, I thought about that, and yeah, it parallels perfectly. And
and this is a thing about, Mike, do you have kids? I can't remember us talking about
I have
that.
a daughter and a son. Yeah.
You have a daughter. How old's your son?
He's my stepson. He is 18. He's in the army.
He's in the army. Okay. Well, I'm gonna get back to what we were just saying. I'm gonna maybe take a long road there. So I have two sons. I have
We'll take
an
the scenic route.
8-year-old. Yeah, I have an 8-year-old. I have an almost 8-year-old and an almost 5-year-old, two boys. And if I've learned anything about being a parent to boys is these kids, these two little primates that are living in my house, these two, they are the most emotional creatures I've ever been around in my entire life. I mean, we're talking about just big tears, and everything is so dramatic, and they're sad and they're angry and they're just, they are
Everything's
just,
the end of the world, right?
everything's the end of the world. They're just these balls of emotion. Okay.
Yeah.
And the heartbreaking thing, this is the heartbreaking thing, is that so many of us were raised to come to believe that all that emotion was bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the sad thing, that many of us grew up in families where we were told either implicitly or explicitly that we need to basically get our act together and that we shouldn't feel so much and that our feelings were things to be suppressed. I grew up with a dad who was notorious for saying, if I was crying, he was the kind of dad that would say, I'll give you something to cry about. Okay. Which is a sense of, intimidation and also a message to say, stop crying. Okay. And so, and I know that my relationship with my dad, sadly wasn't unique, that a lot of people grew up with fathers that had similar sentiments. It may not have been as direct, but there was some sense of like, what it means to be a boy is to be unemotional. Okay. But the problem is, just because you're a boy doesn't mean that you're unemotional. It just doesn't work that way. That's like telling somebody to not have hunger pains because they're a female. It's like our emotions are just central to what it means to be a human. There's not a gender issue there.
Yeah.
And so many little boys were raised to discount their emotions and dismiss their emotions. And what it ends up resulting in, the technical term, is that we just suppress. And when we feel hard feelings, we don't acknowledge them, we don't feel them, we just suppress them. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And over time, as we move into childhood and preteen and teen and young adulthood, and we become someone in our 20s or 30s or 40s, we have decades of all this suppressed emotion. Okay.
Yeah.
And guys, and the reason this is a gender issue, there is a gender issue here, is because as a culture, we typically give little girls permission to feel their feelings, and we do not give that same permission to little boys. So we acculturate little boys to do more suppression, and that's why typically girls don't have the same problem articulating and expressing their feelings like guys do. Guys are like, I'll ask a client, I was like, oh, what, how does it make you feel when that happened? They're like, huh? They're like, what are you talking about? How does it make me feel? What are you talking about feeling? There's just like a total disconnect from.
I came here for you to fix my wife.
Right, exactly. And so that whole, even just the idea of, the idea of becoming self-aware, it's like we have to learn to get in touch. And this is going to sound, and I know a lot of people listening to this are going to discount it because I'm a therapist, but it's like we have to get in touch with our emotions again. And if we don't get in touch with our emotions again, we got no chance at having a healthy relationship ever, ever. It's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't get in touch with our emotions, it's that is the, you know, the result of that is all those angry outbursts when you snap at your wife.
Yeah.
And she says, you know what? I've had it with your angry outbursts and you talking to me that way. It's you drinking too much and your wife having a problem with that, or you having a problem with that. The reason people drink too much is because they're trying to numb all that suppressed emotion that's buried in them. It's why guys gravitate towards porn. It's the same reason. It's a way to feel better. It's a way to manage all that suppressed emotion. And there's all sorts of negative consequences to that suppressed emotion.
Yeah.
So when my therapist was like, hey, go sit with yourself and don't be distracted for 15 minutes and do it every day for a week, what happened for me was all that emotion that I've spent my whole life getting really good at suppressing starts coming to the surface. And I'm like, oh shit, that doesn't feel good. What is all that stuff?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm following you.
So in our journey to become more self-aware, we have to call time out. We have to pause in the busyness of life, and we have to slow down, and we have to ask ourselves these questions and check in with ourselves and say, gosh, what is it that I feel? Can I even put a word? Do I even have a vernacular? Do I have a vocabulary to even put a word to that feeling? You know, that's what we do as parents. You know, when you're a halfway decent parent, that's what you do. You know, you see your kid crying because their toy broke, and you say, oh man, that must make you really sad that your toy is broken. I'm really sorry that your toy is broken. And in that moment, what I'm doing is I'm teaching my son that I'm giving him a word to understand what his emotions are, because he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have the language yet. Or when his brother, steals his Legos and breaks it, I say, gosh, you must have been so angry when that happened, right?
Yeah.
So I'm giving him a vernacular for these emotions. A lot of us, Mike, we didn't grow up getting that. So we don't have language to articulate these emotions. And that is such an important piece in this kind of self-awareness journey.
Would it be safe to say that because we don't understand or we don't have a language to define what we're feeling, that we use the most primitive actions or primitive understanding to express those suppressed emotions, being anger or being aggressive? Um, I can totally see how that would, since we don't understand them, we express them in unhealthy ways. Our most primitive emotions or expressions of emotion.
Yeah, from a psychology standpoint, the way that we kind of talk about that is we have coping styles or coping skills. So
Okay.
when we don't have an ability to articulate these emotions, we generate over time, and it usually starts in early childhood, we generate different coping strategies to deal with the discomfort of these emotions that we feel. We might get aggressive. If I feel like my wife is rejecting me and I don't know how to say that to her, I might become really aggressive with her.
Yeah.
So my aggression is a coping strategy to help me feel better from the rejection. Or I might just withdraw and shut down and get really quiet and go to the garage and start tinkering on things, because inside I'm feeling all that pain, but I don't know how to articulate it. So I'm just kind of trying to distract myself by shutting down. So you're kind of saying it, we go to these primitive ways, and it's in some ways, yeah, that's right. We go to these less mature ways of dealing with the emotion. We go to childish ways. When I have a 7-year-old, and when his little brother steals a toy from him, what does my 7-year-old do? He grabs a bat and he tries to hit him, So
That's
is
one
that
way.
primitive? Yeah, that is very primitive, right? because that's all he knows how to do.
Yeah.
And without sounding disparaging or condescending to anybody listening to this, because I'm not that's not my MO at all. Sometimes that's what we do as adults.
Oh,
Sometimes that's what we do as 40-year-olds.
that's not disparaging. That's cold hard truth. Without that self-awareness that we've been talking about, or understanding uh, what we suppressed for so long, we have a lot of man children, man children, adults, grown adults acting like
Mm-hmm,
adolescents or children,
mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
expressing all this stuff, and some quite literally with a bat going after somebody.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think it's not disparaging or condescending. It's you know what, that's the truth, and that's how it is.
So if we want to be in the top 5% when it comes to being strong and mature and healthy males, whether you're a single male or a male in a relationship, if we really want to be the cream of the crop, we gotta take this self-awareness journey very serious.
Yeah.
It's like it's funny because I was meeting with a client today, and I've been seeing this guy for about a month. He came in to see me, and long story short, his what he initially came in to see me for, we kind of figured out and we kind of resolved it,
Yeah.
pretty fast. And so I met with him today. He was like, hey, um, I think we're good, right? Therapy, I don't need to come back, right? Because, that problem's been solved. And it's funny because it's so in line with what you and I are talking about right now. And so I did my best to kind of give him this explanation that the truth is, all we did was, his house was on fire and we figured out a way to put out the fire. Okay.
Hmm.
But what he really needs to do is remodel the entire house, and part of the house needs to get torn down. Because if he doesn't do that, there's going to be just fire after fire after fire after fire. But when he was asking me that question, he was in that typical guy mindset where he was like, hey, give me the checklist. Let's check the list. And once the checklist is good, I'm going to move on to the next thing. He wasn't really thinking about it in the self-awareness terms like we're talking about it right now. He just wanted
Yeah.
to solve the immediacy of the problem, and he wanted to move on. And so in relationships, what is the immediacy of the problem? How do I get my wife to have more sex with me? How do I get my wife to be more happy? How do I get my wife to, right? That's solving the immediacy of the problem without wanting to discover what the roots of the problem are. And we can solve the immediacy of the problem, but the problem in thinking about things that way is that they just resurface, and they resurface in a different form, in a different mutation, and we never get to, it's like, okay, if your wife doesn't want to have sex with you, let's figure that out.
Yeah.
What is it how is it that you might be in the relationship that becomes sexually unappealing to her? Whoa, that's a hard conversation. And most people don't want to have that conversation, but you can see how important that conversation could be. Or what most people want to do is they want to say, what's wrong with her? Is there a sex therapist that you can recommend to her? Or can we figure out a way to get her libido figured out? Or maybe it's hormonal for her, and never really, well, it's like, maybe it's about you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's about you. And I'll never forget too, a time that, my wife and I we were in our own couples therapy, and I was having a less self-aware moment, and I was just complaining about, I forget the details. I was just complaining about something that my wife was doing, and she was, I can't believe it, she did this, and our couples therapist is just sitting there and he's looking at me, and I can see that he's not even he could give two shits about what I was saying, right? And he just looked at me when I was done with my little diatribe, with my little meltdown. He just looked at me and he's like, so why does that bother you? And I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
He just dropped the hammer on you.
But he was right. He was right. He's like, so what? Why does it bother you? let's talk about you and why does that bother you, and
Yeah.
I think I'm thankful for him for being willing to having the guts to be able to say that to me, because unfortunately, a lot of people wouldn't say that.
Yeah. And I guess the natural progression in this, now that, okay, brothers, you got to have self-awareness. That's what we're telling. Well, as I'm reading through your book, how what kind of question, I guess, top tier questions, what kind of questions can one begin to ask to themselves? Like what are the most important questions? Because I know, while I was reading your book, there was a laundry list of questions, maybe like 15, not laundry list. I'm
Hmm.
exaggerating. We're all about theatrics here at Man Under Construction. I'm just kidding. No, but there are some key questions that a typical guy needs to ask himself. And what kind of questions would those be?
Well, it's a great question, and I love that you're asking that. And I'm going to answer it in a little bit of a different way, because I think this is important too, to kind of start thinking about it in this way.
Okay.
So, and when we do this next interview, Mike, we're going to talk about humility. So I'm not going to go into that much right now, and I'm going to
Okay.
stick with self-awareness. Okay, but in answering your question, I think about the courage we could have by inviting close people into our lives to tell us how they see us.
Oh man, that's a very dangerous predicament. Or
It,
some brothers might find themselves in a,
huh?
yeah,
Right.
that's a tough, to put yourself in that position is a tough, uh
But remember, we're talking
something.
about being a black belt. This isn't white belt shit,
Oh
right?
yeah, yeah, exactly, 100%. And it's funny, a post, and I knew we were going to have this conversation, so I purposely posted something. It said, noble manhood, whatever it takes to get there, kind of as a prerequisite. Okay, we want to get here and we're going to do whatever it takes. And I'm probably going to make a little video after this to share, kind of to promote what we're doing and talk about doing whatever it takes. But yeah, you're right. We're not here to do white belt stuff. We're here to achieve black belt. We're here to be that top tier individual, top, what do you say, 5%?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that is a sentiment that
Hmm.
I feel within myself on my own journey. I want to be that top tier guy. I want to be that
Hmm.
top tier husband, father,
Yeah.
brother in every aspect. I want to be the top tier 4 archetypes, as we talked about earlier.
Well, one of the fastest ways to get there is to have a handful of people in your life. If you're married, your wife is absolutely number one on that list, and dedicating time and conversations and asking them, how do you see me? What do you like about me? What do you not like about me? If you were going to change something about me, what would you change? If I could be different in any area, what would that look like? How could I be a better friend? Okay, and this is
Hmm.
this will dovetail into the next chapter. What we're going to talk about humility, but we become self-aware in the context of relationships, but it's not like we just sit. It's not like we sit down. It's not like we sit down one day in like a lotus pose and we're meditating, and all of a sudden we just know ourselves. Okay,
Yeah.
we really come to know ourselves in the context of relationships, but we have to, number one, be willing to have people and invite people into our lives that are going to be truthful and honest with us, not hurtful, not judgmental and condemning, but honest. And sometimes that honest feedback hurts because we don't like to hear it, because it stings, and it kind of shadows our egos a little bit.
Yeah.
But we become self-aware through relationship, through others. if we have the courage to invite people into that feedback loop.
Hmm. And I want to say something before, and it might be the next thing that you're going to say, and this is part of your book. It's people that are more self-aware, and this is something that you guys could take out there. People that are more self-aware don't experience criticism as a personal affront, attack to their character, because the criticism is either true or not true, and that is powerful. That, can you imagine how much we could avoid by simply knowing that fact, as looking as criticism that's true and not true? But you cannot get there without knowing exactly who you are. So that's why it's so important.
Absolutely.
It's so important. What
Yeah.
we're talking about right now is crucial, and that's why we emphasize that it's the foundation. Because,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Hmm. No, I was just going to say, anybody listening to this, here's a great question, to ask yourself is, do you have people in your life that can speak truth to you? Like truly,
Yeah,
not, I'm not talking about your buddies that you like to go golf with and, that you like to, watch the football games with. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, do you have that leveled up group in your life where people can give you very caring and honest feedback on how they see you? Do you have that? And if we don't have that, that's something that we all need to get like yesterday.
yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of your chapters further on down the journey to black belt husband, or noble manhood, or just to level up as an individual. Having those people around you, it's crucial.
Yeah, it is. But sometimes we don't have that, and just to, a starting. If you don't have that, that's okay. It's something to work towards. But as a starting place, it can simply just be your wife. You can ask her that question. You can ask her, what is her big piece of contention with you? And it's not so much asking the question, it's, do you have the kind of openness in your spirit that you're actually going to receive that you're going to receive it, and you're not going to get
Mhm.
defensive, and you're not going to get retaliatory, and you're not going to let that turn into an argument. You are asking the question to learn about yourself. And
That is a
man,
tough
it's a game
question.
changer.
Yeah, to have that courage and to be at that kind of place, and like we were talking about, we're gonna, we want to get there whatever it takes. So yeah, more than likely, like 99.9%, what she is gonna say is gonna hit you straight in the heart,
It's
and
going to
no doubt
suck.
about it. I can guarantee you that whatever she's gonna say, and only because it's the dynamic is so weird. It's usually like with people we don't know and we don't care about their criticisms, whatever. But it's the close people that know us, that know our downfalls, that know our mistakes. When they say something, it kind of gets in there a little differently. So uh, if you guys don't have a, like you said, well, your wife needs to be part of that group, so she needs to be in there, as well as some really close brothers that you trust. So get ready. It's not going to be something easy, but nothing in life that's worth anything is ever easy. So I just want to throw that in there, maybe as a disclaimer, as a
Hmm.
warning, guys, get ready. This is
Yeah.
going to be, it's going to be
Yeah.
hard. It's going to be hard.
And therapy is also a great tool for this kind of work too. And I say that as a therapist, and also having been, in my own therapy for a really long time. The nice thing about therapy is that it is kind of a more neutral, objective person that doesn't necessarily have skin in the game. And in some ways, their feedback of us can be pretty objective, because it's like, hey, I don't, my experience of you is in this room. I don't see you, in other contexts. So I'll just tell you how I see you in this room. And if you're looking for a therapist, or if you're in therapy and you're listening to this, ask your therapist to give you that kind of feedback. How do you see me? Sometimes therapists can, They might not know that you want that. They might not know that you want that kind of direct, kind of challenging feedback. But man, if you want it, it's awesome. It's awesome. And and you'll get some really insightful feedback from your therapist if you can ask them that question. How do you see me? What do you think my deficits are? And what do you think gets in the way of me being more successful? And so don't be afraid to ask your wife, ask your therapist, ask friends, ask your family members, ask your kids. Ask your kids. Your kids will tell you your kids will be more honest with you than anybody. They'll be more honest with you than anybody. And that's actually really painful because we all love our kids so much. But kids don't have a filter, and they'll tell you what is absolutely true in this world. And that's the beautiful thing about children, is that they haven't learned to filter yet. But if we have the courage and we can ask our kids, ask your kids, if you have ask them, how do you think daddy is? Do you think daddy's a good daddy? If you were gonna change something about daddy, what would you change about daddy? I'll tell you, my kids, I don't know, they would say something about, I'm kind of moody, that's just the thing about me. It's like, and I know that that's what my kids would say. And it sucks. I wish that I was different. I wish that I didn't have that as an issue, but I do. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what they would say. And it's something that I work on all the time. It's something that I'm always aware of. I'm always thinking about it. And I don't get it perfect, but I'm always thinking about just making progress.
And that's what it's all
And
about.
that's all. Yeah. And we all have something. We just have to be willing to address the something. We all have something. Nobody's immune. We're all broken, fragile humans,
Mm-hmm.
and we're just doing our best. And if we can be strong enough to elicit that feedback from people, kids, spouses, therapists, friends, man, we are going to skyrocket our growth.
So in terms that guys like to hear, this is the first battle. This is the first confrontation of the demon, of the dragon you have to face. And demons and dragons are not pretty. They're vicious. They blow fire out of their mouth. And that we're not talking about your wife. We're talking about the dragon. Yeah. Although it might feel like fire coming out of her mouth when she tells you these things that are potentially gonna hurt, bruise your ego. But this is the first battle uh, that we have to confront. We got to go head on. And this is the first dragon that we have to slay. We have to confront this one. We can't, there's no way around it. You can't shortcut this. And I like to use this analogy. Like, let's say you bruise your ankle. Let's say you're lifting weights and you bruise your ankle, and you try to shortcut this and bench, 305, or you try to squat. I mean squat, bruising your ankle. If you try to squat something extremely heavy, it's not going to happen. All you're going to do is just cause more damage to your bruised ankle. So this is the first path. You can't go around. There's no cheating. There's the first dragon we got to face.
No
And we got to face it head on. So I think we've laid a great foundation for the coming chapters. We talked about different things. We talked about self-awareness. Is there anything you'd like to add on top of this?
No, Mike, I think this is maybe a good stopping place. We've touched on a lot of different ideas regarding self-awareness. I think it does feel like a really good foundation. And maybe what I'll say, just to reemphasize, is that this stuff is hard.
Yeah.
And I'm not sitting up here, as like, Mr. Know-it-all, and it's easy for me. Nope, not at all. It's hard for me. And the thing about self-awareness is that it's never something we actually achieve. It's always a progression for the rest of our lives. We're always increasing or trying to become more and more and more and more self-aware over time. So it's not something that we just get, okay? Because as time goes on, we change and we evolve and we become more self-aware about new things. And I just want to say that it's not easy, So, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, man, it sounds daunting, to become aware of my emotions, or to go back into my past and, look at my childhood and look at certain things about how I was impacted. And it is a dragon. It is. It feels like we have to go back and look at something really scary. And I just want you to know that there's a lot of people that have gone before you that have done it, and we can kind of take comfort that if other people have been able to do it and they've fared okay, then I know that we can do it. We can fare okay. But just know that the things that we're talking about, they are really hard, and so I don't want you to walk away from this conversation feeling discouraged, like, man, these guys have this thing figured out and that's something hard for me. No, we don't have anything figured out. We're just sharing what we've become aware of this thing. We want to pass on this knowledge, but we're still in our own process. We're still in our own process of figuring out our own battles to fight.
100%. And I same sentiment as Quentin. Both of us have been down this journey, and some of us are further along this path, but that doesn't matter. We're both have gone or are on that path to becoming better. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have hiccups, or we're not, the dragon's not going to pop up and try to snatch us on the way. But that's what it's all about. It's about moving forward in the path, but this is where you start. This is the beginning of the path, and we're both going through it right now, and it's not easy, but it can be done. And it's definitely a path you need to take to level up as an individual, as a man, and as a black belt husband.
Wonderful.
So the next chapter is going to be, like Quentin hinted at it, it's going to be about humility, which is the next step, the next progression, the next dragon of this journey. So thank you, Quentin, so much for taking the time to sit here and just share your insights and share your thoughts, and trying to make this just an easy flowing conversation. I know a lot of times these kind of conversations, they become very monotone. It's usually I'm saying this and you hear what I'm saying. And I really wanted to create just two guys chatting, two guys going back and forth, similar paths on different stages of life. Not that far. I'm not saying I'm 40, so you say you're 44, so not that far different. But just kind of like a fireside chat, just two guys sitting down, pouring their heart out, wanting to give you the tools and the insight to start your journey to be a better man. So thank you, Quentin, so much, and I look forward to our next meetup.
Awesome, Mike. Great chat. I look forward to it too. And thanks everybody for listening. I'll look forward to the next
and
round.
Of course, I'll put the link to his book on Amazon, and any other information to reach out to Quentin, I'll put it in there as well. So you guys, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you next time.